How important are animals to us and the way we perceive the world and ourselves? Let me tell you, nowhere near as valuable as during the Iron Age in Northern Europe. Why and how were animals so relevant culturally and religiously? The answer in this video. I recently saw a study quoted in The Guardian stating that human connection to nature declined significantly over the past 200 years. And it's really not that surprising if you think about the history of industrialization. Moreover, it is something that also has roots in Christian medieval thought, where humans were considered the crown of creation and everything must be subordinate. Which brings us to today's topic, animal art in the Iron Age, because it is just one example reflecting not only the role animals would have played in the imaginary of the people of Northern Europe, but that we're dealing with a vastly different worldview, where the boundaries between the human and the non human would have been much more blurred. And this is also echoed in later medieval stories about shape shifting, for example. So, animal art used to decorate weapons, clothing, or jewelry in Northern Europe between about 400 and 1100. And the common thread would be that humans and animals seem interwoven in the patterns, mingling with each other. This type of art evolved in a time of great changes when the Roman Empire was disintegrating and smiths from the border migrated northward. In the world of chieftains and petty kings, a new form of decoration evolved that sparked the curiosity of scholars since the 1800s. The main focus back then was to establish categories, motifs, development, but more recently, the focus has shifted toward meaning and religious belief. On these objects, we can glimpse warriors with animal strength, strange beings with human like features, and hidden animals in the decoration. We encounter a reality where gods and warriors could take on the appearance of animals. And we do have an interesting Old Norse word for that, which is hammer, would mean shape or skin. And certain animals would endow them with all sorts of qualities, animals such as birds of prey, wolves, snakes, bears, or boars. So the figure of the berserk, the berserker, might not have been just completely made up, but arisen from the thought of transfiguration in order to overcome your limits and integrate the powers of nature inside your body. Later sources also speak of the fylgja, which would have been some sort of animal companion linked to your personhood. Both Christianity and evolutionism change this perspective. The human soul is interpreted as immortal, and humans are appointed to rule the earth. On the other hand, Darwinism highlighted common origins and brought us a little bit closer to nature, but humans still perceive themselves as the superior dominating species. Animals categorized, are they food, are they pets, are they endangered species, and so on. So it's always in relation to how they serve us. But newer research has also shown that animals can experience the world, they can interact in very complex ways, and maybe they're a little less different than us than we may think. But each age has its own framework, and how people conceptualize the animal world more than 1,000 years ago would have been vastly different. Take horse meat, for example, traditionally eaten in Northern Europe before Christianity. The church outlawed the sacrificial feast, the so called blot, and eating horse meat was considered a serious crime according to laws such as the Elder Gulathing's law. You could even lose your lands and get outlawed. So, why the horse in particular? We see the horse in Old Norse sources all the time. A remnant of older belief might be found in the saga of Hravenkel, a priest of Freyr, who owns a sacred horse who's going to cause a great deal of trouble. Read the saga. And horses are also present in Norse mythology, of course, with important functions. And don't think only of Sleipnir, the horse of Odin, but also, for example, the horse who helped build the walls of Åsgardr, the realms of the Aesir gods. There are plenty of traces of horses in the archaeological records as well. The horse had many usages. Horses were close to humans, but at the same time, they would dwell in the wilderness as well. So they belonged to both the human and the non human world. As archaeologist Lotte Hiriaga notices, it had a magical ability to read the landscape. So it is a creature between the realms, between the tame and the wild, between life and death. And these magical powers had been noticed long before the Viking Age by Roman author Tacitus, for example. Seeking to interpret its behavior would have meant accessing secret knowledge shared with the beast by the gods, so the horse acted as a medium. Sacrificing it in this logic would mean an attempt to make use of those magical powers. So you can imagine that from a Christian perspective, that would have been regarded as a little bit of a competition, since the horse is a mediator between the human and the divine, just like Jesus Christ. Animals were completely eliminated from rituals, while Christ was presented as the most vulnerable, the sacrificial lamb. We have examples of missionaries, such as Saint Bonifacius, complaining about the priests of the recently converted Saxons because they were wearing garments with snake decorations. The Antichrist leading to deprivation here. So during that time, the 8th century, you also need to think that the church was fighting to establish its doctrine. And in this sense, it was also fighting against such patterns of belief that integrated animals into the universe and kept it together. Through the ritual of blot and metamorphosis, you could for a while become an animal and let your spirit roam in different shapes. Hints at such ancient beliefs can be found in later texts describing extracorporeal experiences, such as in the saga of the Volsungs, for example, where Sigmund and Sinfjotli transform into wolves. And also, we have a lot of episodes, usually involving Finnish sorcerers leaving their bodies. If you think about it, Odin himself shares such shamanistic traits, and in Old Norse, we don't have just one term meaning soul, we have a whole collection of components such as hammer, hugger, or fylgja. A hybridization of powers with animals possessing qualities desired by humans, and this is precisely what Iron Age imagery depicts. We have snakes, for example. The snake exists in several environments. It hibernates and returns to life, very much like a shaman. It moves quietly and it swallows animals whole, so it would have been seen as a double animal, perhaps. We see snakes on rune stones all the time, which would have been a local development of commemorative monuments. But before that, we see snakes on weapons, textiles, woodwork, and small amulets. The Jormungand, the Midgardsormr, kept the world together in Old Icelandic mythology. We also have birds of prey. Eagles are majestic, they fly high, they're menacing, and in many societies, the shaman can travel to other realms in the guise of an eagle. Odin transforms into an eagle, but he is more associated with ravens, though. The raven would have been a liminal animal. Ravens are omnivorous, they're very intelligent, they're solitary creatures, but they also work in groups, or they're also scavengers and birds of the battlefield. They also fly high, and in Norse myth, they returned with essential knowledge, so they would have been part of Odin's ability to transcend boundaries. Wolves are also a constant presence. A lone wolf can roam endlessly to establish territory, and they're also pack animals. We have lots of wolves in Norse myth, including the Ulfhednar, the characters you can find on some helmet plates. So perhaps some warriors could have been involved in a ritualistic behavior meant to enhance their abilities. It was more like a way to tackle the violence you'd be involved in. Wild boars also appear on such design. The wild boar would have been perceived as a dangerous animal, only attacking self defense. So we have all these animals in Northern art as images of the powerful wilderness, signaling the greatness of the warrior. The bear is oddly absent from this type of art, although it is present in a different form. For example, in the claws found in graves, such as the one in Hun in Ostfold in Norway. Or the body was wrapped in the fur of the bear, or animal teeth were used as amulets. Possessing animal power was essential as a giver of life force. You can see that in the concept of the berserker, and again in later sources, which, despite being quite creative, do preserve a tiny bit of older concepts. In the saga of Hrolf Kraki, for example, we have the character Bodvar Bjarki turning into a bear and fighting as such on the battlefield. Animal art probably originated in southern Scandinavia in the late 300s and then spread across a large area. So it was born at the intersection with the Roman Empire, suggesting a great deal of movement and reciprocal influence. It never remained static, it evolved with the changes in society and technology, but it did disappear with the expansion of Christianity. So in Scandinavia, somewhere between 1000 and 1100. We have a lot of different groups of people. We say Germanic to refer to a common linguistic thread, but not really to political entities, not even ethnic entities. Another common thread would have been the art, which shows some shared values and beliefs. The animals are sometimes depicted in a naturalistic way, they are identifiable, but sometimes they're also abstract, non naturalistic depictions of heads, beaks, bodies, legs, making them very difficult to grasp. Sometimes it's decoration and sometimes it's much more. As mentioned in my video about the bracteates, we often find a figure accompanied with a horse and birds. Odin, perhaps, or a chieftain, or better said, a proto Odinic image. Some motifs seem to depict stories, others, undeciphered meanings. Many of the styles carry names which remain from the older fashion of researching patterns and stylistic traditions, taking the name usually from the find place. So we have Nutem, Salins, Vendel, Osseberi, Mammen, Borre, Urnes. It's still very useful if you want to study the stylistic, artistic traits of the objects and also if you want to date them. The changes reveal contact between people, shared ideological traditions, technological development, handicraft creativity. But animal art is also a starting point for investigating worldviews and the shared stories of those who produce them. Let me just give you one concrete example, the figure of the gripping beast from the start of the Viking Age. This refers to an animal that uses its paws to hold its limbs, those of its surroundings, or the frame of the ornament. It's quite naturalistic. You can usually identify two front legs with the shoulder area and two hind legs with strong hips. It is a thin beast that can stretch in many ways. Some of the oldest ones decorate the famous Useberi ship. Here we have almost human like creatures gripping each other. Later, the individual beast becomes common, so a large one occupying the whole pendant. The ears, the snout, and symmetrical body with pronounced hips. It played an important part in the Borre style in the 800s, and there are also a couple of pendants sort of in the same style, like the bear I showed you before, rolling itself and grabbing its hind legs. The big question relates to the represented animals and their connection to nature. There's definitely a lot we're missing, and they might even have had names to pinpoint their identity. At any rate, we're dealing with a very well known visual vocabulary at the time, especially in the absence of vast written material. Such imagery would have helped stories come to life. The gripping beast was inscribed into the tradition of telling stories with picture. This particular motif became very widespread in all sorts of materials, ranging from wood to jet, amber, silver, alloy, and on different objects from swords to jewels. Where it came from is also a bone of contention, but we do notice similar motifs in Anglo Saxon and Carolingian art. However, it could also be a Scandinavian innovation. On the ship, we can also see ribbon like animals resembling birds from previous styles, so it is embedded in previous traditions. Whether we should associate them with entertainment or darkness is again difficult to say, but imagination definitely played a part in their design. So I hope you enjoyed this short explanation. I've also left you a book recommendation if you want to study the various ornamentation styles, and if you have a favorite object depicting a natural or supernatural animal, feel free to share it in the comments. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by subscribing and also joining as members. This was Irina. Thanks a lot, and till next time.